In the quiet hills of New Mexico, Dr. Evelyn Shaw cared for every life that found her farm, wild or tame. But nothing prepared her for the day. A wounded bobcat appeared at her gate. She called him Ash. Not far from the barn, a mother goat named Willow struggled to bring new life into the world. What began as fear between predator and prey soon became something no one could explain. A miracle of instinct, trust, and love. The wind moved like a slow breath across the New Mexico ridge, stirring dust and sunlight into a faint golden haze. At the edge of the pines, a lone cabin rested in quiet surrender to time, its porch painted with evening light and the scent of cedar smoke lingering in the air. Inside, Dr. Evelyn Shaw washed her hands in the small basin by the window. Retired from fieldwork, but not from compassion, she spent her days tending injured creatures brought by rangers or neighbors. The wilderness was both her patient and her only companion. That afternoon, she heard a sound that didn't belong, a low, desperate rasp, hidden beneath the hum of cicadas. She followed it past the fence line, boots crunching over dry weeds, until she saw the glint of wire. A bobcat lay trapped, the steel teeth of a poacher's snare cutting deep into its foreleg. For a long moment they watched each other, predator and human, frozen between fear and mercy. The animal's eyes burned gold in the slanting light, fierce yet pleading. When it struggled, Evelyn knelt, speaking softly, the tone of someone who had nothing left to lose but kindness. Her hands moved carefully, loosening the rusted loop. The cat hissed, claws flashing, but she didn't pull back. Blood streaked her wrist as the wire fell free. "Easy now," she murmured, wrapping his leg in her jacket. The wild heartbeat against her palm felt painfully alive. Back at the cabin, she cleared the kitchen table and laid him upon an old blanket. The bobcat's chest rose in shallow rhythm. She cleaned the wound, stitched the torn muscle, and whispered apologies between each knot of thread. The storm outside deepened. The clock forgot to tick. When dawn broke, the cat still breathed. Evelyn brewed coffee and sat nearby, listening to the first rustle of morning birds. The creature's tail flicked once, an almost imperceptible sign of defiance. She smiled. "You're a fighter," she said. "You'll need a name." She called him Ash, for the grey dust that clung to his fur, and for the way he had risen from near death, like something reborn. For days he refused food, watching her from the corner of the cage, eyes bright with wild suspicion. She let him watch, saying nothing. By the fifth morning, hunger overcame pride. He ate in small, wary bites, never looking away from her. Evelyn spoke softly about the ridge, the fire season, and the silence that sometimes felt heavier than grief. The bobcat blinked, as if measuring her loneliness against his own. Weeks passed. Ash regained strength, pacing the porch rail beneath the wide desert sky. At night, she heard him call a short, rough cry that echoed through the canyon and returned softer, almost mournful. The sound filled the empty house, like memory returning from exile. One evening, while she mended a fence post, Ash approached without fear. He stopped a few feet away, nose lifted to the wind, eyes catching the last ember of sunset. In that stillness, Evelyn felt something unspoken, pass between them. Trust, fragile but real. When darkness fell, the bobcat curled beneath the porch, his silhouette framed by the fading glow of her lantern. Evelyn closed the door but left it unlatched, knowing the wild would never be hers to keep. Yet for that night, both woman and creature rested as if home had found them. The morning air smelled of pine and cool dust as sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Evelyn's cabin. Ash stretched on the porch rail, tail flicking, golden eyes fixed on the horizon. The scars on his leg had healed, though a faint limp remained like a secret the wild refused to forget. Evelyn watched from the window, sipping her coffee in quiet ritual. She no longer saw a wounded creature, but a living reminder that survival could wear gentleness as armor. Some mornings, she caught herself talking to him as if to a neighbor who never answered but always listened. The days settled into a rhythm. Evelyn worked in her small garden, trimming herbs for sows, while Ash patrolled the yard's edge like a silent sentry. Occasionally, his ears twitched toward distant sounds, a coyote's call, the hiss of wind through sagebrush, and his muscles coiled, ready for flight. She had built him a shaded shelter near the fence line, though he seldom used it. He preferred the open porch, the world always within reach. Once, when thunder rolled across the ridge, he didn't retreat. He only raised his head, eyes narrowing at the sky, as if to challenge the storm itself. One afternoon, Ranger Tom Hale arrived in his dusty green truck. He greeted Evelyn with a grin that couldn't quite hide concern. "Still keeping that wild one around?" he asked, nodding toward Ash. The bobcat watched from the porch, unmoving, like a carved guardian. "He keeps himself around," Evelyn replied, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I just don't tell him to leave," Tom chuckled, but his gaze lingered. He told her about sightings of rattlesnakes slithering closer to human properties dry season, pushing them out of the canyons. Ash's ears flicked at the sound of Tom's voice. When the ranger stepped closer, the bobcat let out a low, guttural growl that rolled like distant thunder. Tom froze mid-step. "Still wild," he muttered. Evelyn smiled faintly. Wouldn't have him any other way. Later that evening, after Tom left, Evelyn knelt beside Ash with a bowl of water. "You don't trust anyone but me," she said softly. He blinked once, slow and deliberate, the way cats do when they allow someone into their small, private world. It felt like a fragile truce. In the fading light, Ash prowled the yard's border. His paws left neat imprints in the dust, weaving between fence posts. Evelyn followed at a distance, noticing how his body moved with restrained grace, half shadow, half flame. He was free, yet he chose to stay. That night, the forest whispered of change. Coyotes called from beyond the ridge, and an owl's cry split the silence. Ash sat upright, staring into the dark with the intensity of a creature that remembers pain. The hair along his spine lifted, but he made no sound. Inside, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Through the window, she saw his outline framed by moonlight, motionless, patient, carved from instinct and something deeper. For the first time, she wondered if the wild had brought him to her for a reason she didn't yet understand. When dawn finally came, Ash leapt lightly onto the porch rail again. The world was quiet, the storm's scent gone. Evelyn opened the door, coffee steaming in her hand. The bobcat turned his head toward her voice. Eyes soft, but unreadable. Somewhere between wild and home, he stayed. The air that morning felt different, sharper somehow, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Ash prowled along the fence line, his paws silent against the brittle earth. Each step pressed faint tracks into the dust, a secret trail only he understood. Evelyn stood by the porch, mug in hand, watching him move with the precision of instinct. His ears twitched toward the hills, responding to sounds too distant for her to hear. She'd learned that silence meant more in the wild than words ever could. Far off, the cry of a hawk cut through the wind. Ash froze, golden eyes narrowing. The muscles in his shoulders rippled as he lowered himself, not in fear but in focus. Evelyn followed his gaze, but saw only trees swaying against a pale sky. She turned back inside, yet unease lingered. The rhythm of her life, coffee, chores, tending to rescues, suddenly felt fragile. She noticed Ash spending more time near the edge of the property, sleeping less, listening more. Nature was shifting, and so was he. That afternoon, Marta Lynn arrived with her truck rattling like loose bones. "Snakes again," she said grimly. She'd found a shed skin near her goat pen, long and fresh. Evelyn promised to check it out, her mind flashing to Tom's warning. Ash appeared as if summoned, stepping from the shadows of the shed. His fur bristled slightly when Marta approached, but he made no sound. Evelyn knelt beside him, brushing his flank gently. "He smells it too," she murmured, and Marta shivered. They walked the fence line together, boots sinking into dry soil. A pattern of sinuous trails crossed the sand, one of them recent. Ash moved ahead, tail low, sniffing, his body drawn tight like a bowstring. Evelyn's heart began to race without reason. When they reached the back pasture, Ash stopped dead. A hole gaped beneath the boards, cleanly dug, earth still damp. Evelyn crouched, tracing the marks with her fingers. "Something's been through here last night," she said. Ash's growl was low, vibrating through the ground. That night, the wind rose again. Evelyn secured the windows and set a lantern by the door. Ash wouldn't settle. He paced from one end of the porch to the other, tail lashing, eyes glowing in the shifting light. He was waiting for something she couldn't see. At midnight, a sharp hiss sliced through the dark. Evelyn froze, every nerve awake. From the yard came a guttural snarl, the kind she'd never heard from him before. She grabbed her flashlight and ran outside, the beam trembling in her grasp. The yard was still, but Ash stood rigid near the fence, ears back, lips curled. The smell of musk and earth filled the air. Somewhere beyond the shadows, something moved, scales dragging over sand. Evelyn caught her breath and whispered his name. Ash didn't turn. He held his ground, gaze locked on the darkness that pressed against the edge of the wild. In that moment, Evelyn understood he wasn't afraid. He was warning it, drawing the boundary between his world and hers. And whatever it was, it listened. The next morning broke quiet and pale. the sun dragging itself over the ridge in soft gold. Ash lay beneath the porch, tail twitching against the dust. His eyes tracked a beetle crawling across the step, but his mind was far from play. He sensed something stirring beyond the trees. Evelyn opened the door with a yawn, coffee steaming in her hands. "You were up all night again," she said gently. Ash blinked, his ears flicking toward the distant hills. He had been listening to the ground itself, to whispers she would never hear. Marta Lynn's truck rumbled down the road before noon. She waved from the window, calling, "Morning, Doc. Willow's close to birthing. She's restless." Evelyn smiled, but noticed Ash rise, his body tense. The mention of that name drew his focus like a string pulled taut. At Marta's small farm, goats bleated lazily in the heat. Ash followed at a distance, padding along the fence line, his golden coat glinting beneath the light. Willow, the pregnant doe, stood apart in the shade of a sycamore tree, watching him with calm brown eyes. Evelyn and Marta talked about feed and fencing, while Ash circled quietly, pausing near the barn's edge. A faint tremor ran through the soil, a vibration too subtle for the women to notice. His whiskers quivered. Somewhere underfoot, the ground breathed danger. When they returned to the cabin that evening, the air was heavy, charged. Ash prowled restlessly, pausing often to stare at the fence that divided Evelyn's yard from the open scrub. His ears pinned back each time the wind shifted. The night carried the scent of something cold. Evelyn tried to distract herself by sorting supplies on the porch: antiseptics, gauze, old tools, but her thoughts kept drifting toward Ash's unease. "You're making me nervous," she muttered. He turned his head, gaze fixed on her, then back toward the woods, unblinking. A sudden rustle came from the brush, a quick slither through dry leaves. Ash moved before Evelyn even stood. His body flowed low to the ground, silent and sure. She followed him with her flashlight, beams sweeping across the field, catching nothing but shadows. He stopped near the gate, hackles raised, nose twitching. Evelyn could hear it now too, the faint rattle beneath the hum of crickets. It faded as quickly as it came. She took a step forward, but Ash blocked her path, eyes glowing fierce in the dark. "All right," she whispered, lowering the light. "We'll leave it be." They returned to the porch, the tension still humming between them. When she finally went inside, Ash stayed, guarding the threshold as if drawn by an invisible line only he could see. Later, as thunder grumbled far off, Evelyn sat by the window and watched him. Lightning flashed once, revealing his silhouette against the field head lifted, ears forward, utterly still. In that instant, he looked less like a rescue and more like the spirit of the land itself. By dawn, the storm had passed. Evelyn found him asleep near the door, dust clinging to his fur, calm at last. She smiled faintly, kneeling beside him. "Whatever you were watching for, it's gone now," she whispered. But in her heart, she wasn't sure she believed it. By late afternoon, clouds gathered like bruises above the ridge. The wind carried the smell of dry rain and iron. Ash lingered near the barn, pacing in silence. His tail flicked with unease, each motion quick and sharp. Evelyn sensed it too. The storm was coming, And not just in the sky. She stacked firewood by the porch, glancing often toward him. "You feel it, don't you?" she murmured. Ash looked up, ears pinned back, the gold of his eyes dim under the fading light. He turned toward the pasture, body tense, as if waiting for something unseen. Marta's voice crackled through the radio. "Doc, Willow's acting strange. She's moaning, won't stay in the shelter." Evelyn promised to come. As she gathered her medical bag, Ash appeared by the truck, silent but insistent, his body half in shadow. At the farm, thunder rolled low and slow across the valley. Goats huddled near the fence, uneasy. Willow stood apart, sides heaving, eyes wide. Evelyn soothed her with soft words, preparing blankets and warm water. Outside, Ash prowled the edges, sniffing the dirt. A sharp gust swept through, carrying the dry hiss of sand. Ash froze, nose lifted, every muscle drawn taut. Beneath the wind's howl came a sound he knew too well, a faint rattle that cut through the air like a warning bell. He growled, deep and low. Inside the barn, Evelyn didn't hear it. She turned to fetch more towels, leaving Willow for only a moment. Ash moved like lightning, leaping through the open gate, his body a streak of fire against the dark. His growl broke into a roar that startled the herd. Evelyn spun around. The beam of her lantern caught the flash of scales near Willow's hooves. A rattlesnake, thick and coiled, ready to strike. Before she could react, Ash lunged, his claws slashing, teeth sinking deep. The snake struck back, its fangs sinking into his foreleg. The sound was terrible, a hiss, a yowl, the dull thud of struggle. Evelyn rushed forward, shouting his name, though he would not know it. The snake writhed once, then fell still. Ash stumbled, dragging his leg, blood dark against his fur. He stayed between her and the danger. For a moment, the barn held nothing but the heavy beat of rain on tin. Evelyn knelt beside him, hands trembling. His breath came ragged, eyes half closed. She pressed a towel around the bite, whispering, "Stay with me, Ash. Stay, stay." Lightning flared, showing the scene in brutal clarity. Willow safe behind him, trembling but unharmed. Ash's chest rose once, then again, slower. He blinked toward Evelyn, recognition flickering there like the last ember of a fire refusing to die. Marta burst in, gasping. Evelyn's voice was steady but shaking underneath. "He saved her," she said, still holding him. "He saved her baby." Marta knelt beside her, staring in disbelief at the motionless rattlesnake sprawled across the straw. Rain hammered harder as Evelyn gathered Ash into her arms. He was heavier than she expected. Limp but still warm, she carried him toward the waiting truck, whispering through the storm, "Hold on, you brave thing. Just hold on." The wild had chosen its hero. The rain came down in wild sheets, drumming on the roof as Evelyn sped through the dark road. The truck's headlights cut through walls of water, illuminating only moments of the winding path ahead. On the seat beside her, Ash lay wrapped in a towel, his breathing shallow. She whispered his name as if her voice could hold him together. "You did it, Ash. You saved her." The bobcat's head stirred slightly, eyes half-lidded. Every bump in the road drew a soft grunt from his throat, but he didn't fight her touch. He had no strength left for wildness. The old veterinary cabin appeared through the storm, its windows glowing faintly. Evelyn stopped the truck and ran inside, arms tightening around his limp body. The air smelled of disinfectant and dust, relics from a life she'd left behind, but now desperately needed again. She laid him on the metal table, fumbling with drawers for supplies. Her hands shook as she drew antivenom from a vial. The label faded with time. "Come on, just a little longer," she said, her voice breaking into the silence. Ash's chest rose and fell like distant thunder. Outside, lightning split the sky open. Evelyn cleaned the wound, pressing a damp cloth to the swelling. The punctures were deep, the skin already darkening. She worked without thought, years of training, guiding every motion. Somewhere, deep inside, fear had given way to resolve. Ash's paw twitched as the serum entered his vein. His body tensed, eyes snapping open for a moment. Evelyn met that golden gaze and saw both pain and something purer, a quiet acceptance. "You're not allowed to give up," she whispered fiercely. "Not tonight." The storm raged, shaking the windows. Evelyn leaned close, listening to the ragged rhythm of his breath. "You foolish, beautiful creature," she murmured. "You don't even know what you mean to me." Her tears fell onto his fur, mingling with the rain she carried in. Hours blurred into fragments of noise, the ticking clock, the hiss of rain, the hum of life, fighting to return. She draped a blanket over him, resting her forehead against the edge of the table. The bobcat's pulse was weak but steady, a thread she refused to let snap. Sometime before dawn, the wind quieted, the worst had passed. Evelyn stirred at the sound of claws, scratching faintly against metal. Ash lifted his head, unsteady, disoriented, but alive. She gasped, her exhaustion breaking into a sob that sounded almost like laughter. She crouched beside him, hand hovering near his shoulder. "You stubborn soul," she said softly. He blinked once, then lowered his head into her palm for the briefest second. It was no accident, it was recognition. Something neither wild nor tame could define. As morning light seeped through the rain-streaked windows, Evelyn stepped outside for air. The world smelled clean again, reborn. Behind her, Ash stirred within the cabin, the faint sound of claws tapping against the floorboards, a quiet promise that he was still there. When she returned, he was resting again, breath even and slow. She smiled, exhaustion heavy but sweet. "You made it," she whispered. "We both did." The bobcat lay motionless, except for the rise and fall of his chest. Outside, the last of the storm faded into peace. The morning after the storm came softly, with clouds drifting like ghosts across the hills. Inside the old clinic, Ash stirred beneath a wool blanket. His breathing was shallow but steady, the rise and fall of a fragile victory. Evelyn watched from her chair, eyes heavy from a sleepless night. She leaned forward, whispering, "You made it, fighter." Ash blinked, unfocused, then lowered his head again. The venom's toll had left him weak, trembling when he tried to move. Evelyn's fingers brushed gently along his fur, careful not to disturb the bandage wrapped around his leg. Outside, puddles glimmered in the morning sun. Evelyn opened the door to let the scent of rain and sagebrush fill the room. The bobcat lifted his nose faintly, recognizing the wild he belonged to. His tail twitched once before stilling again, a reminder that survival had its cost. By noon, Ranger Tom Hale arrived in his muddy truck, carrying a portable heater and fresh bandages. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "He's still with us?" Evelyn nodded, smiling weakly. "Barely, but he's not done fighting." Tom looked at Ash with cautious respect. "He saved a life," Tom said quietly. "A wild thing protecting another, never thought I'd see it." Ash's ears flicked toward the voice, but his gaze stayed on Evelyn. She replied softly, "He doesn't see wild or tame, just danger and life worth saving." Tom helped her clean the wound, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. Ash tensed but didn't strike. The silence between them was thick with awe. When they finished, Tom set a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You did good, Doc, but he'll have to decide if he stays." That evening, the wind shifted warm again. Evelyn sat by Ash, reading aloud from a worn field journal she'd kept years ago. Her voice was low, soothing, meant as much for her as for him. He watched her lips move, the rhythm of words anchoring him to the moment. When she paused, Ash lifted his head slightly. His eyes met hers clearer now, though shadowed by fatigue. She smiled through her tears. "You're supposed to be out there," she said, glancing toward the woods. "But for now, you rest here with me." The next day, Ash managed to stand, his front paw trembling under his weight. Evelyn steadied him with a towel beneath his chest. "Easy," she murmured. He took 2 steps, then stopped, panting, but the light in his eyes returned a spark of the creature he'd once been. By nightfall, the clinic had grown quiet again. Ash curled near the door, head resting on his uninjured paw. Evelyn sat nearby, notebook in her lap, writing down every heartbeat she'd fought to save. The pen shook when she wrote his name. It no longer felt like just an animal's. In the early hours, thunder rumbled again, far away. Ash lifted his head, ears twitching toward the sound. Evelyn stirred from her chair, smiling softly. "It's just thunder," she whispered. "Nothing coming for us this time." He blinked once, slow and sure, before closing his eyes. When dawn returned, light spilled across the floor, painting both of them in gold. Ash breathed evenly, chest rising strong and certain. Evelyn sat beside him, hand resting close to his fur, but not touching. For the first time in years, she felt something inside her healed too. The days after the storm passed, in quiet rhythm. The land smelled new again, washed clean by rain. Ash rested near the open doorway, his bandaged legs stretched out before him. He could feel the sun warming the floorboards beneath his paws, a comfort older than fear. Evelyn moved carefully through her routine, tending to chores she'd neglected for days. Yet her eyes drifted often to the bobcat by the door. Each rise of his chest felt like a small miracle, but each twitch of pain reminded her that healing demanded patience and the courage to let go. By the third morning, Ash began testing his strength. He pushed himself up slowly, trembling as weight returned to the wounded leg. Evelyn crouched beside him, murmuring, "Easy now." Ash glanced at her once, then took a halting step toward the light spilling in. Outside, the ground still shimmered with damp earth. The smell of pine and dust called to him. Evelyn followed, heart tight, as Ash limped down the porch stairs. He paused halfway, nostrils flaring at the scent of wild grass. For the first time in weeks, the world stretched open again. He spent the afternoon near the fence line, watching birds flicker across the sky. The limp remained, but pride filled his movement. Evelyn brought water in a bowl, setting it near him. "You don't need my help forever," she said softly. "Just long enough to remember you're strong." That night, he didn't sleep near the door. Instead, he lay by the open window, listening to coyotes echoing in the distance. The sound stirred something ancient inside him, a call that neither comforted nor frightened, only reminded him who he was. In the darkness, Evelyn woke to silence and realized his space by the window was empty. Panic flashed through her. She stepped outside barefoot, whispering his name into the cool air. The yard stretched still under the starlight. No sign of movement, only wind in the trees. Then she saw him, a shadow near the fence, crouched low but calm, his head turned as she approached, eyes reflecting faint silver. He didn't flee. For a long heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, understanding that some distances can't be bridged, only respected. She whispered, "If you need to go, you can." Her voice trembled but didn't break. Ash blinked once, slow and deliberate, then rose. He crossed through the tall grass, his gait uneven but certain. The night swallowed him gently, as if claiming back what had always belonged to it. Evelyn stood there long after he vanished, the world humming around her. The ache in her chest was sharp but clean, threaded with pride. She whispered again into the wind, "You did what you were meant to do, and now so must I." As in Niskon. The next morning, the cabin felt hollow. His paw prints lingered near the steps, dark impressions fading as the sun climbed higher. Evelyn pressed her hand against the marks, smiling through tears. "Goodbye, Ash," she said softly. "You'll always know the way home." As evening fell, she left the door unlatched like always. The air moved through the cabin gently, carrying dust, pine, and memory. Somewhere in the distance, a single cry rose, the unmistakable call of a bobcat, neither mournful nor lost, but alive, and that was enough. The first chill of autumn rolled through the valley, brushing gold across the trees. Evelyn walked the fence line, the air still carrying faint echoes of summer. Each morning she looked toward the woods, half expecting to see a familiar shape waiting in the tall grass. But the horizon stayed empty. Weeks had passed since Ash vanished into the wild. His absence had become part of the rhythm of her days, the silence heavier, yet calmer. She no longer called for him, though her eyes lingered on the places he used to sit. Healing, she realized, sometimes looked like stillness. One afternoon, Martelin stopped by with Willow and her newborn kid in the truck bed. "They're both strong," Marta said, smiling. Evelyn leaned against the gate, her heart swelling. He saved them, she whispered, and Marta nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. As they talked, movement flickered at the edge of the trees. Evelyn froze, her breath catching. For a moment, she thought the forest itself had shifted, but then she saw it, the brief glint of amber eyes, watching from the shade. The moment was gone as quickly as it came. That night, she sat on the porch, long after dark, listening to the wind rustle through the pines. Somewhere beyond hearing, a bobcat's cry rose low, steady, almost familiar. Evelyn closed her eyes, her hand resting over her heart. The sound felt like a memory returning home. The next morning, Ranger Tom Hale arrived, dusty and grinning. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Spotted a bobcat near the ridge, limped a bit, but looked healthy. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, hope sharp and sudden. "Was he alone?" she asked quietly. Tom nodded. Later that day, Evelyn took a walk toward the ridge. The ground was hard and cracked beneath her boots, yet she moved as though drawn by an unseen thread. At the crest, the world opened wide, endless sky, whispering trees, and the hush that only wild places know. She didn't see him at first. Only when a breeze swept through did she notice the shape at the edge of the clearing. A bobcat crouched low, golden coat bright against the dusk. He looked thinner, older perhaps, but his eyes carried the same calm fire she remembered. Evelyn didn't move closer. She simply stood there, the space between them heavy with understanding. Ash lifted his head, gazing toward the small figure of Willow's kid in the distance. He blinked once, then turned his gaze back to her. No sound passed between them. Then, with a grace born of survival, he rose and limped forward, just far enough for the light to touch him fully. For a single heartbeat, they were part of the same world again, woman and wild spirit, both shaped by loss and love. Then Ash stepped back into the trees. Evelyn stayed until the last of the sun melted behind the ridge. The world fell quiet except for the pulse in her chest. She whispered, "Thank you," though she knew he was already gone. Gratitude, she realized, didn't always need an answer to be heard. When she returned home, the porch light flickered softly. The hills behind her glowed under the rising moon. Somewhere far away, a bobcat's cry echoed once more, neither lonely nor sad, just alive, carrying through the night like a promise that some bonds never fade. Winter crept softly across the ridge, brushing frost along the windows of Evelyn's cabin. The mornings came slower now, wrapped in silence and pale light. She often found herself staring toward the woods, half expecting a movement in the fog, a flicker of gold fur between the trees. The world around her had changed. Marta's goats grazed in peace, and the small kid Ash had once saved was grown and strong. Ranger Tom visited less often, saying the valley had been unusually calm that season. Even the wild seemed to rest, as if holding its breath. Evelyn walked the path behind her house every evening, tracing the footprints that once belonged to him. Though the wind erased them long ago, she still saw them in her mind, sharp, deliberate, carrying the rhythm of a creature who had always known where he was going. One grey morning, she spotted fresh tracks near the creek. They were faint, half filled with snow, but the shape was unmistakable. Her pulse quickened. She knelt beside them, fingers brushing the ice. "You came back," she whispered, smiling into the cold air. That night, a sound broke the stillness, a low growl carried by the wind. Evelyn stepped outside, lantern in hand. Across the yard, a shadow moved at the edge of the trees. For a heartbeat, she saw him clearly. Ash, older, leaner, the scar on his leg, faint but real. He didn't approach the porch. He stood still, eyes reflecting the lantern's glow, the wildness in him untouched. Evelyn's breath clouded in the air. "Hey, old friend," she said softly, "you found your way home." Ash blinked once, slow and calm, before lowering his head. She set a bowl of water by the steps and retreated inside, leaving the door unlatched as always. From the window, she watched him drink, his movements careful but sure. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt shared again. By morning, he was gone, leaving only paw prints in the snow. Evelyn followed them past the fence, down to the creek where they disappeared into the trees. The air shimmered faintly with sunlight, and though the forest swallowed the trail, peace filled her chest. Weeks passed. Locals began talking about a bobcat near the ridge, one that never hunted livestock, only watched from afar. Marta called it a legend, the guardian of the valley. Evelyn said nothing, but every night she left the porch light on, just in case. One evening, Tom stopped by with news. "Spotted him again," he said. "Looks strong this time." Evelyn smiled quietly. He always was. They stood together on the porch, watching dusk settle. Somewhere beyond, a soft cry rose through the fading light. As darkness deepened, Evelyn closed her eyes. She pictured Ash moving through the forest, muscles flowing beneath his coat, wild heart steady. He was where he belonged, between shadow and sun, between loss and home. That thought made her smile. When the stars appeared, she whispered into the night, "You saved her baby, Ash, but maybe you saved mine too." The wind carried her voice through the valley, and for a brief, tender moment, a single echo answered a call from the wild that promised she was never alone. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.